Hello, Karen Miller here again. I hope all is well. I hope you're eating well and trying to be healthy. I hope you are fasting and exercising so that you would live a long life and be healthy and happy. Today, I wanted to speak about wild rice. This is what wild rice looks like. It's black. It's not black rice. It's wild rice, which Dr. Sebi recommends. This is not a hybrid. This is what I think all of the other rice have come from. This wild rice. It's very hard, so you have to soak it. So before you cook this rice, it has to be soaked at least 24 hours. This rice here has been soaked for 48 hours because I'm going to be doing the dosa with it, and I want it to soak for as long as possible. You see, when it soaks for 24 to 48 hours, it starts to bloom. You can see the white parts of it coming out. You see the white parts. And then this here, you see it's some of it remains whole, but it's not as hard as when you just get it out of the packet. So if you compare some of the black grains here, let me get a few here. If you compare, this, it looks a little lighter, the ones that have been soaked. So I'm preparing this rice to do dosa. Dosa is a flatbread that is made in southern India. It's a staple there, and they usually use white rice. And I used to make dosa with white rice, but since I stopped eating white rice or anything that is white, I had the idea that maybe I could do it with wild rice. The thing about the wild rice, of course, is that it's not as starchy as the white rice. The hybrids are not as starchy, and this is the point that Dr. Sebi made all the time about the starchiness of these foods, that once you do selective breeding and you take something from nature and you do hybridization to make it into something else, there are a lot of starches. A lot of starches are produced. So this is why white rice and brown rice and all the other varieties of rice are so starchy. This rice is not as starchy. So I'm going to show you how to do this process. So now I showed you what the wild rice looks like, and then what it looks like after it's soaked. So now I'm going to show you the next step in making the dosa. Okay? So now I'm going to show you the process for making dosa. Okay, this flatbread. So I have the wild rice. I keep saying black rice, not black rice. Black rice is completely different to wild rice. This is the wild rice, and I'm gonna pour. I have about a cup and a quarter here. I'm gonna pour about a cup and a half of water here to start the process of in my NutriBullet to break it down. Okay, so getting there. It's gradually getting there. You have to do this for about 5 minutes. So this is what the wild rice looks like after you process it. So I'm now going to pour it out into this dish to be fermented. So let's talk about fermentation. This dosa is has to go through, not the dosa, the rice has to go through a fermentation process. And fermentation is something that I got into, and fermented foods is something I got into because of my son, who, as you know, is on the autism spectrum. And we in the autism community, we discovered that fermented foods were more easily digested, because most of our children on the autism spectrum suffer with gastrointestinal problems. They have a hard time digesting certain foods, and fermented foods are easier to digest than unfermented foods. So this is how I got into it, and I discovered dosa. And because rice is also a gluten-free food, I said, okay, this is a great thing to do. But now I don't eat white rice anymore, so I came up with this idea to do it with the wild rice. So here is what it looks like. You see, it's like a pancake batter. So let's talk about fermentation. Fermentation happens from, it's really the lactic acid, from lactic acid producing bacteria. Now, this bacteria is on the surface of all living things, even us humans. This is why if you don't shower or something, you start smelling not necessarily stinky, but maybe, you know, that sweaty kind of soury smell. So this is what fermentation does. It gets the food a little bit on the sour side, and this lactic acid producing bacteria is on the surface of plants and vegetables and fruits. So this is what causes the fermentation. It's the bacteria. So if you're familiar with probiotics, in a sense, you're creating probiotic food. This is what fermentation is. This is what the fermenting process is all about. And it produces the lactobacillus bacteria. It's a probiotic, meaning it's a good bacteria. So again, this is what it looks like. So what I'm going to do with this, it has to be fermented for 24 to 48 hours. And after it's fermented, then you add some salt. And what I usually do with this, you can add some agar-agar or xanthan gum, because this rice, the wild rice, does not have a lot of starch in it. So you have to add something to this rice, this mixture, so that when you're frying it to make the dosa, it's not going to fall apart. This is what I did during my experimentation. I did this, the first time I did this, it made a big mess. It was a big mess, because I realize now that the wild rice, because it's a hybrid, it doesn't have as much starch, because it's a hybrid. So you have to add agar-agar. This is agar-agar here. It's a sea vegetable flake that you put into foods to give it that, you know, gluten-y texture, to keep it together. Or xanthan gum, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with xanthan gum. I use it in making my breads, my gluten-free breads, to keep it together. You know, if you use kamut flour, if you use spelt flour, you need a little bit of xanthan gum to keep it together. So this is going to be fermented for, I like to do it for at least 48 hours. 24 hours is good, but I think 48 hours is better. And then we start cooking it. Okay?